The Being an Engineer podcast is a repository for industry knowledge and a tool through which engineers learn about and connect with relevant companies, technologies, people, resources, and opportunities. Enjoy the show.
At that time, I wanted the kids to have the confidence to know that there are no careers off limits to them, but then also know that there are going to be naysayers as they grow older. But even if there are, that's okay. People are allowed to think you suck. It's whether you believe what they say. And if you know from 8 years old and you have the confidence to know that you can go for whatever you want, it doesn't really matter what anyone else says.
Hello and welcome to the Being an Engineer podcast. Our guest today is Neil Thompson, who holds degrees in materials engineering and biomedical engineering. Neil has held roles as a product development engineer, freelance writer, patent agent, professional speaker, business development manager, author, and company founder. You can find him online at teachthegeek.com, askuncleneil.com, and youtube.teachthegeek.com, and we'll be sure to get those in the show notes as well. Neil, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me, what made you decide to become an engineer?
My father told me to.
That's too short of an answer. Let's hear a little bit more than that. Although I have the same answer, honestly.
I used to lie about that answer too, because I was embarrassed by it. Because oftentimes when you hear people answer that question, it's usually pretty interesting. Maybe they were in robotics club when they were in high school. Maybe they played with Legos when they were children. I don't recall playing with Legos all that much. And I certainly wasn't in robotics club. I was okay, I suppose, at math and science. Wasn't the worst, wasn't the best. I finished high school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do next. My father said, do engineering. I had no other ideas. So I said, okay, engineering it is.
That's awesome. I had a very similar experience. We were sitting around the dinner table and my dad said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. He said, you should consider engineering. And I said, okay. So why do you think your father suggested engineering for you?
Well, I think it had to do with stability. It's one of those degrees that you can get in undergrad where you can make pretty good money coming out of school. So I think that had something to do with it. And I also think that maybe the idea of it being more, I guess, future thinking, as opposed to some other things that maybe might be a bit more, like, what's the best way to describe it? Not as future centered. Engineering and STEM in general are very, it's the future. Innovation is the future. And I think he saw that back when I was graduating from high school. So he thought, do that, so you'll always have a job.
When he suggested that you become an engineer, did you even know what engineering was at that point?
Oh, not at all. I knew that it had to do with math and science, but that's about it. All the various different types of engineering, maybe I knew the names, but I didn't really know what any of them entailed.
And how did you go about studying what it means to be an engineer, what engineering school is going to be like, where to apply, all that stuff?
I mean, I applied for the various schools that were in my area. I picked the one that was closest to me so I could live at home still and save money, which actually worked out really well. I didn't have as much student loans as perhaps those who stayed on campus. And I picked the actual major that I picked was materials engineering, and I picked that one because by the time I had gotten into the school, all the other ones were full. So it was either I picked materials engineering or geotechnical engineering, and I thought that materials was a bit more broad.
Yeah. As you were going through school, did you ever have the thought that, oh man, this is not really for me? What was Dad thinking? Or from, pretty much day one, was it, this Dad knows me pretty well. This is the right fit for me?
Well, and it never really crossed my mind. I mean, he said, do it. And I said, okay. I didn't have any other ideas of what I wanted to do. And so I figured I started it, first year, second year, third year, fourth year. By the end of the fourth year, okay, I got a degree. Now what am I going to do? But even that entire time, I wasn't thinking there's actually something else that I preferred to do. So I just continued on that path.
That's hilarious. All right. So you started your career and you spent several years working as a product development engineer. Can you share a few of the projects that you worked on during that time? Just anything interesting that comes to mind? Maybe think about one of the most technically challenging projects and how you solved problems there, or maybe the most interesting or meaningful project for you, and why you felt that way?
I worked in medical devices, more specifically spinal implants, and even more specific than that, orthobiologics. So what exactly that is when you have a spinal implant, it can be made out of a number of materials, and ceramics and metals being probably the more known materials that they're made out of, but they can also be made out of human cadaver bone. So I worked in the group that made devices or implants out of human cadaver bone. It required going to tissue banks every now and then because that's where all the bones are. When people die and they leave them, they become donors, or they designate themselves as donors, their bones go to tissue banks typically, and then those bones are used to make implants for other people. So some of the more interesting projects I worked on had to do with going to the tissue bank. And if you've ever been to one, you'll certainly never forget it because there's a distinct smell of human bone being cut. And then there's also a distinct smell of human fat being rendered. It's a smell you'll never forget.
I've been in a cadaver lab, and I remember smelling formaldehyde. Is that part of it, or is really the bone and the fat?
Oh no, it's the bone and the fat. I'll smell formaldehyde all day if I didn't have to smell bone and fat ever again.
I just had a thought. What was it? Oh, right. So they take ground up bone, cadaver bone, and they somehow use that as a material to create an implant?
Yeah, so for instance, if you have a bulging disc, an orthopedic surgeon might remove it and they'll replace it with an implant, and the implant could be made out of human cadaver bone. And then they might take some ground up bone and place it around the implant so that it fuses to the adjacent bone.
Interesting. So this isn't like a bone anchor or something like that. This is kind of a replacement for the bone that was already there?
It's a replacement for the intervertebral disc that was there.
Okay. And so the surgeon will kind of form this? No, I'm sure that was already done by an engineering team. Are they formed into various sizes, and the surgeon can purchase whatever size is appropriate for the patient, and when it comes, it's more or less ready to go, just needs to be installed, for lack of a better word?
Indeed. Orthopedic surgeons really are the construction workers of the medical industry.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. All right. Well, you mentioned that working at the startup Advanced Biologics, you were there for several years wearing many different hats. You did wet lab testing. You were a project lead. You wrote journal articles and presented at conferences and probably many other activities. That's probably, at least to some degree, a stressful environment. It's a startup. You have to wear a lot of hats, do a lot of different things. Maybe you had to work a lot of hours too. Do you like working in that kind of environment? And what made you feel okay about working there as opposed to what maybe would have been a more comfortable corporate type job?
Well, I very much prefer startups. The biggest company I've ever worked for was maybe about 500 people. So I don't have any experience working for big conglomerates. And I really like startups because you mentioned it being stressful, but I mentioned it. I thought of it as being more exciting because you get to be involved with a bunch of different aspects of the business, not necessarily the one where you're the expert. I was writing journal articles. I wasn't the best writer, but I got better at it because I had to write these articles. During my first job or my second job, when I was a project lead, I had to give presentations in front of senior management. I wasn't prepared for any of that, but I got better at it over time because I didn't want to look like a fool every time I had to present in front of the CEO. But I liked having those opportunities because it just made me better.
What were a couple of the favorite things that you did during that time?
Favorite thing? Probably going to the conferences. I really enjoyed that. One of them I got to go to was actually in Venice. It was my first time first and last. Actually, I haven't been back. So my first time in Europe. I got to present actually not even just a poster, but I got an oral presentation. So I got to present the work that we had been doing at the company. And it's really cool because there wasn't a whole lot of companies that were presenting. It was mostly graduate students from schools. So it was interesting also to see what was going on in academia. And oftentimes what happens is corporations, industry and academia make partnerships see if what's coming out of academia can be useful in an industrial setting at some point. And just building up those type of relationships with the academics that were there, I really enjoyed as well. I likely wouldn't have had those type of opportunities, I don't think, if I'd worked at a larger corporation, which I think tends to be more siloed.
Yeah, and at this point, correct me if I'm wrong, you were not necessarily a public speaker, professional speaker yet. Was it? Were you nervous presenting at a conference like this, or was that something that you really enjoyed, looked forward to, and had a lot of fun doing?
Oh, I was nervous, very much nervous. I mean, when I first started giving presentations, I was terrible at it. And I noticed a lot of the other engineers weren't all that much better at it than I was. I think the big issue a lot of us had is we have all this technical expertise, but we're not the best at putting it in such a way that non-technical audiences can understand, or sometimes even technical audiences. God knows how many of these conferences I've went to and sat down and fell asleep, even if I knew what this person was talking about, but they were just not all that engaging in presenting the material. And I definitely saw that issue in myself, and it was something that I knew would be beneficial in addressing.
So we're definitely going to get into your transition into a professional speaker. And I think even before that happened, you started to get into writing. Is that right?
Yeah. So I had to, yes, I had to write even from my first job, just writing protocols, writing reports, that type of thing, more technical writing.
Tell me more about your transition from being an engineer into being a writer. I know it's not black and white. There's definitely some crossover there. But how did that advance over the years? You mentioned you were doing some technical writing, but you've done more than just technical writing, right? You've written for yourself, your own business. You wrote a book even. How did that evolution occur?
Really was just having interest in seeing where they took me, at least in the instance of the children's book that I wrote. And then in the other instances where I was doing more technical writing, it was just being able to convey information better. It's one thing to be technically adept at your job, but if you're not good at communicating it, whether it's oral or written, oftentimes it goes for nothing. I mean, the catalyst that caused me to even get better in public speaking was my project being canceled. The project that I was brought to the company to do. I thought I was going to be out of a job. It really was a wake up call that I needed to really, get myself into gear and get better at this presenting in front of people. And that's certainly what I did. And then, as I mentioned, with the technical writing, which just writing in general, it just seemed to be an appropriate corollary. I think that's how you say it. An appropriate addendum, I guess, addition to the work that I was doing, oral presentations.
You mentioned a children's book that you wrote. Can you talk a little bit about that? Tell us where the idea came from and why you wrote it.
The book's called Ask Uncle Neil, Why Is My Hair Curly? It's about my nephew asking me why his hair is the way it is, and I use science to answer the question. So that's where the idea came from, is just him being an inquisitive kid asking me questions all the time. And I didn't even know the answer at the time, but I thought I could figure this, I could find out by doing some research. And then I thought this could really be an interesting book, because there's a number of books out there about hair, but not necessarily why it is the way it is. So that's why I decided to write the children's book, and it's rated for children ages 8 and down, so up to 8 years old. And I really wanted to focus on that age range, because at that time I wanted the kids to have the confidence to know that there are no careers off limits to them, but then also know that there are going to be naysayers as they grow older. But even if there are, that's okay. People are allowed to think you suck. It's whether you believe what they say. And if you know from 8 years old, and you have the confidence to know that you can go for whatever you want, it doesn't really matter what anyone else says.
That's a great story. I'm really curious about the answer. Why does hair get curly? What's the technical explanation?
Technical explanation is there's no current explanation.
Really?
Yeah, there's a number of theories as to why it is, but there is no definitive answer.
Oh, that blows me away. I thought for sure you were going to have this really material-specific explanation for us. How funny. All right. In 2015, you started working as a patent agent. Tell us, what exactly is a patent agent, and how did you get into that? What was your experience like? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it?
I became a patent agent because my boss told me to. seems
I'm
like I
sensing
have.
a trend here.
Yeah, you're sensing that trend. My father told me to do engineering. My boss said to become a patent agent. I guess I just like being told what to do. But now I work for myself, so I don't like being told what to do. I want the exact opposite. So I was working at this company, Advanced Biologics, actually, and the boss I had wanted the engineers to become patent agents, so he wouldn't have to outsource patent drafting to outside counsel. And I'm the only engineer that ended up becoming a patent agent. The other couple of engineers, there's three of us, they didn't bother to take the test to become one. So I became a patent agent, and my boss still outsourced all the patent drafting to outside counsel. So for a number of years, I was a patent agent with nothing to patent, at least while I was at that company. When I eventually left, I had to figure out what I wanted to do. And I figured, well, I became a patent agent all these years ago. Let me give this a go as a freelancer. I eventually realized that freelancing as a patent agent is rather difficult, and it's better to be affiliated with a firm so I could get more interesting cases. And oftentimes, people that want to patent inventions have other needs that patent agents can't fulfill, because a patent agent essentially is someone who can draft patent applications and file them with the patent office. And then if the patent applications are rejected, the patent agent can go back and forth with the examiner, the patent examiner, to see if the application can be approved and issued as a patent. And the main difference. Oh, go ahead.
Would this be kind of analogous to like a PA and a MD relationship where you can do a lot of the work, but there are certain things that are off limits unless you have that MD, in this analogy. As the patent agent, you could do a lot of the legwork and even submitting the patent to the patent office, but there was, obviously some things beyond that you can't do without a law degree. Is that a fair analogy?
That's an excellent analogy. So essentially, with your analogy, the patent agent would be equivalent to the physician's assistant, and then the MD would be equivalent to the patent attorney. And that's the main difference between patent attorneys and patent agents is law school. And because I didn't go to law school, I can't be a patent attorney, but both patent attorneys and patent agents can draft and file patent applications. It's just that patent attorneys can then do more legal work, such as litigation.
I didn't even know that there was a role one could have to submit patents without being a full-fledged patent attorney. That's very interesting to me. What was the process of becoming a patent agent? Is there some kind of test that you have to study for and then pass?
Yes, there's a test, but to be eligible for the test, you have to have a background in STEM, typically a degree in science or engineering.
Got it. Okay, how interesting. Well, I'm going to take a very short break and share with the listeners that teampipeline.us is where you can learn more about how we help medical device and other product engineering or manufacturing teams develop turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines to characterize, inspect, assemble, manufacture, and perform verification testing on your devices. Also, I'm going to add a quick plug in here that we are we're looking for help getting 100 reviews on our podcast, and we're offering a $50 Amazon gift card if you give us a review on I think Apple Podcast is the platform that allows reviews. Anyway, a $50 Amazon gift card while supplies last. We're not going to give out 100 of these things if you give us a review on Apple Podcasts. So back to the interview. We're speaking with Neil Thompson today. Neil, you've worked as a professional speaker addressing STEM audiences, and one of your main focuses being helping STEM professionals get promotions and pay raises at work, which I imagine our listeners are going to be very interested in hearing about. Can you share a few of those strategies with us? What should engineers do to get promotions and pay raises?
Talk. When it comes down to it, it's just not being quiet. Typically, the person that gets the pay raises and the promotions is the person who's able to advocate for themselves. If you're the type that thinks that your work will speak for yourself, you will be that engineer sitting in their cubicle, stewing because somebody else got that promotion and pay raise that you thought you deserved. So it has to do with communicating with the appropriate people, with people that have the ability to help you out in your career, sponsors, mentors, essentially decision makers.
what is one really tactical, detailed thing that any engineer listening right now can do, tomorrow, this week, this month, to take a step towards getting a promotion, getting a raise, getting a whatever it is they're looking for?
Say something in meetings. Often, I remember when I was an engineer, I'd often be very quiet during the meetings because I was taking everything in. But oftentimes what would happen is you get ignored, and sometimes people don't even realize you're there. And you can't get promoted and get the pay raise if you're invisible. You got to become visible, and you do that by saying something. Although one thing I do remember when I was an engineer and wasn't all that talkative is people would often say things that were said earlier during the meeting. So you could be in a meeting and somebody would say something, and then somebody would say the exact same thing maybe 10 minutes later. I don't suggest doing that. I do suggest listening well and intently and actively to be able to contribute to a conversation, as opposed to someone like myself, at least initially, who will just sit there.
Don't do that. Don't just sit there. I have a problem myself where sometimes I just don't have a lot to say, and I don't know what to say. What are some strategies that you can think of for people out there who might be similar to me, where sometimes they don't have a whole lot to say? How do we get ourselves out of that mindset and into a mindset where we're much more active in the conversation and we can think of things to say?
One easy way to get around that is by listening. When you listen to what other people say, asking them or reiterating what they said to make sure that you understand what they said. So that doesn't really require anything else but just listening. You're not adding new information. You're just looking to clarify whatever they said. So I think that can be really helpful because and another benefit of that is you may very well have not interpreted what they said correctly. So the person may very well say, no, well, actually, that's not what I meant. I meant this. So it's helpful both ways.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Not only do you have something to say now, but you also, it almost forces you to really listen actively, because if you're going to reiterate something, you need to know what you're reiterating. Well, when you started your career as an engineer, did you expect to pretty much just be an engineer, or was it always part of the plan to branch off into different areas like writing and patent law and entrepreneurship?
No, none of this was planned. All these interests came up as time progressed. When I first started working, I got a job as a research associate at a startup that was building out a technology to treat lesions in cartilage. It seemed appropriate because I had just gotten a master's in biomedical engineering, so to go into medical devices just seemed obvious. And so that's what I did. And then the next job I got was as a product development engineer. And that seemed rather obvious too, still working in medical devices, but not for cartilage, but for spine. And then even after that, working at Advanced Biologics, it was again startups and working with spine. And then I did another job at Biostructures working with spine. Everything seemed to be, it seemed to make sense to do. But then once I left the fourth job and I had to figure out what I wanted to do next, I think it was then that I realized that I didn't have to continue down this particular path, that it was possible to try out other things and see where it took me. And that's essentially what I did. That's where working as a freelance patent agent came from. That's where doing freelance writing came from. Founding Teach the Geek, helping scientists and engineers communicate better with non-technical audiences came from. The idea from the podcast and YouTube channel that I have, that's where all that came from. It just came from me realizing that I didn't have to stay on a particular path and I could branch out.
I think that's one of the great things about the engineering education is that it teaches you how to think. And once you know how to think, there's very little that you can't do. I was similar in a sense. I got laid off from my job back in 2009, and I had already started a photography business on the side. I had started doing some freelance web design. And so I had a couple of revenue streams that were already active, and I kept doing those things. And then later on, instead of looking for another engineering job, I started my own company. But I don't think that I would have been super comfortable even believing that I could have done some of those things had I not gone through engineering school and convinced myself that I knew how to learn and I knew how to learn to do new things.
That's an interesting way to put it. I certainly didn't think going through engineering school that it was teaching me how to think. I was just thinking I need to pass these classes so I can graduate in 4 years. Maybe my whole idea, in general, when it came to engineering school, is because I didn't pick it. I didn't put too much stock in what it is or what it was. So by the time it was over, I was just glad to have gotten the degree, gotten through it in 4 years to just move on to whatever was next.
Yeah, yeah, and those were not easy 4 years. That was, at least for me, it was a struggle.
Well, same here.
Well, I'm really curious about your role as business development manager. This was at a company called Sterilient, if I'm correct, because it's essentially what I do now at Pipeline. And I would love to hear what were a few of the most effective ways that you've found to acquire new engineering services business.
Sterilite was started by a couple of former coworkers and I, and the idea behind it was working with typically smaller medical device companies on packaging, because oftentimes they may have the resources in house to obviously work on the product, but they don't necessarily have the resources in house to work on the packaging that the product goes into, and it's a lot of times they don't even put all that much thought into the packaging either. And that's where we come in. We can help these companies with developing the design of the packaging that they can then put their product into, and so that it can still meet all the various requirements. And going about finding clients and just getting work is just been referral, word of mouth, doing good work, that type of thing, reaching out to people that we've worked with before, because I mentioned we used to work together. And so, and we've gone on to work at different companies. So reaching out to those resources as well. And then they refer us to other people. And it's kind of worked out really well that way.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to your company, Teach the Geek, now. And I'm going to read verbatim the description that you listed as a founder of your company. Okay, here it goes. As a product development engineer, I had to speak in front of management every month for project status meetings. I was terrible at it first, but improved significantly over time. I turned everything I learned into an online public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. The course's focus is helping STEM professionals communicate effectively with those outside their field, such as management and customers. So you've already mentioned this a little bit earlier, and first of all, congratulations at being able to improve your speaking skills. Was there a specific incident that convinced you that you needed to improve your speaking skills, or was it just kind of a general sense that you had over time?
Oh, no, it definitely wasn't a general sense. When I first started giving those presentations in front of management, you would have thought that I would have improved after the first one because it went terribly, but I was stubborn. I didn't after the first or
What
second.
about it went terrible? Like, how did you know at the end that did not go well?
Because I was getting questions afterwards that I thought I had answered during the presentation. But because I didn't do a very good job of engaging the audience and just putting the information in a way that they could understand, now I'm getting these questions and I'm getting more and more flustered. I mean, I was already sweating profusely before the damn questions, and now I'm sweating even more. So I essentially it was a waste of time for everybody involved. And I thought I would have gotten the message, but I didn't. Even after the second or third, really what the catalyst for me getting better at presenting in front of people was my project getting canceled. And because that was the project that I was brought to the company to do, I thought that this was the end. They're going to let me go, and then I was going to have to find another job. Luckily, I was just moved on to other projects. But that really was the scare I suppose I needed to make sure that hopefully I was never going to be in that position again.
Was the project getting canceled, do you think, related in any way to an inability to communicate progress and items regarding that project, or was it a totally separate thing?
I've always thought that it was my inability to communicate the importance of the project. The orthobiologics group that I belonged to at that company was new. So it wasn't as if we were working on a whole lot of projects. It was maybe 3 of them. So when one of them got canceled, that's one project down. So that's only 2 projects within the whole group. So the idea of if I was just better at presenting the information in a way that they could understand, we could have kept those 3 projects going as opposed to the 2.
Yeah. What was the journey like after after you had this epiphany that, hey, I really need to get better at communication, at my presentation skills, what was the journey like developing those skills?
I joined Toastmasters. For those of you all that don't know, it's an international organization with chapters all over the world, and their goal is to help people in improving their public speaking skills. So no matter where I was living, I joined a Toastmasters club, and it offers an excellent forum to practice your public speaking skills. There are 3 parts to a Toastmasters meeting. There's table topics, which works on impromptu speaking. So you get a question that you didn't prepare for. You have about a minute to answer it. And then there's the prepared speeches, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. You prepare a speech and then you give it. And then there's the evaluations where someone evaluates your prepared speech. And I participated in all facets of the Toastmasters meeting because I saw the benefit of getting better at both giving presentations that I prepared for and then also the impromptu speaking, which is definitely something that I struggled with early on.
How long was it before you felt like you had achieved some basic level of competence with presentation skills?
I'd say 6 months to a year. I was especially when I joined Toastmasters, I was adamant of getting good as quickly as I possibly could. So I started participating in meetings right away. Oftentimes, when people first join, they may hang back and not do all that much in the meetings. But I thought if I'm spending my money here, I'm going to get the most out of it. So even if I'm not all that great at first, well, you got to start somewhere, and it might as well be now since I'm paying. So I participated in impromptu speeches or impromptu speaking, the table topics. I gave presentations. Actually, at one point, I was giving a presentation a week, and I did that for about 10 weeks. So that was close to 2 months. Every week I had to give a presentation. So that definitely sped up the improvement. You don't get better at anything, public speaking included, if you don't do it. Practice makes progress.
Yeah. You have a really interesting way of communicating, at least in this podcast. You've had some very short but very punchy answers to some of the questions. And then you've been kind enough to go off and elaborate beyond those. But my father told me to do it. My boss told me to do it. Talk. Toastmasters. Right? So very short answers. Is that intentional? Is that a skill that you've intentionally created, or that's just how you've always talked to people?
I think that's the way I've always been. I'm not the biggest fan of ramblers. Maybe it's because I have a short attention span. I'll stop listening. And another thing, the more you talk, the more opportunity you give people to stop listening.
Amen. I love that. Well, communication is probably one of the biggest topics that just seems to come up in this podcast. I always ask people, what are some of the most important skills to have as an engineer? And invariably, communication comes up, which in the beginning surprised me a little bit. I thought that I'd hear more about technical skills, but most people, they talk about communication, and there's a technical skill here and there that's thrown in. So I love that you've built this entire course around it. Can you share a few golden nuggets? What are some of your favorite techniques to help engineers communicate more effectively?
Visualizing success. If you tell yourself you suck, you likely will. But if you tell yourself that you're improving, you likely will. So typically what I do is before I give a presentation, I'll close my eyes, I'll take a deep breath, and I'll visualize the way I would like things to go. So I'll visualize me hitting all the points that I need to hit during the presentation. I'll visualize the people asking me questions afterwards and me having answers. And if I don't have answers, being humble enough to say I don't know, but I could find out, just depending on the situation, if it's possible for me to find out and let them know the answers later. Essentially, I look at the way that I would like things to happen. And then when you do that, you get into a mind space, at least I do. I get into a mind space afterwards where I'm a lot more calm, a lot more poised when I actually have to give the presentation. I'm not the sweaty mess that I originally was when I first started giving presentations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Anything else that comes to mind? Any other skills or tactics?
Timing. You don't want to be that person that goes over time. I used to hate those people so much. You see here, as you mentioned, that I tend to be pretty, economical with my words. So
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, that's the way I typically tend to put it. So when it comes to the presentations that you have to do, don't be that person that goes over time. That's a sign of disrespect to your audience. So for instance, if you're given 15 minutes, practice your presentation so that you finish within 14. So now you have a minute buffer So in the event that you go a little over ad-libbing something that you didn't practice, you at least will have that 1 minute buffer to still be able to finish within the 15 minutes.
Can I steal that term from you, being economical with my words? I love that.
Oh, absolutely. But give me my credit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Credit Neil Thompson for that one. Last question I have. I have often marveled at or been really impressed with people who are up on a stage giving a speech. Maybe it's a TED Talk or something like that. And I think for sure TED Talks, these people, they rehearse a lot and they have it nailed down exactly what they're going to say word for word. Is that a skill that you learn at Toastmasters to how to remember the entire speech that you're about to give? Because it seems to me like it could be difficult to remember, all those words. You're speaking for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or maybe even more. How do you remember everything that you want to hit on?
I have absolutely no idea. I would never tell somebody to memorize every word. I would think that'd be extremely nerve-wracking, because in the event that you forget a word, it might throw you off kilter. What I typically tend to tell people is to have bullet points and practice to the point where you hit all the points, because that will have you be a bit more, I guess, in the moment. Also, when you give your presentations, you're not thinking I have to hit every particular word to make it so that the presentation went off without a hitch. And another thing, if you were to practice to the point where you know every word off by heart, it may very well come across as robotic. You still are a human being. You're presenting to other human beings. They want to see, I guess, have more of a human interaction with you, as opposed to you just memorizing a speech and spitting it out.
Yeah. Okay. My last question. Now, if you could put anything on a billboard for engineers to read that might improve their lives, what would it be? It doesn't need to be about communication. It can be technical. It can be whatever you want. But something that you were going to put on a billboard to help engineers, what would it be?
Don't ignore soft skills. You mentioned earlier that you were surprised that communication and more soft skills were something that a lot of engineers would talk about and needing to improve. You thought it would be more technical. I wouldn't have thought that at all. I thought it would pretty much be implied. You do graduate from an engineering school. You work in a technical field. You should have the technical skills on down. If you don't, then perhaps you're in the wrong field. But the soft skills is something that's not taught in schools typically. It's something you have to learn when you start working with other people. You're not going to just be working with other engineers. You're going to be working, especially where I was in medical devices. We worked a lot in teams. So we worked with marketing, sales, operations, talking to senior management. I had to do that every month. A lot of these people don't have any technical background, but you still have to communicate with these people. How do you do it? You can't just fall back on, well, I'm a technical person. That's all I'm going to focus on. You do that to your detriment. You will be that, if you do focus on that solely, you will be that engineer that's mad all the time and disgruntled because someone else got that promotion and pay raise you thought you deserved. And the only difference between the two of you were they were better at communicating with people that could advance their careers.
Well, this seems like a great place to end. Neil, thank you so much for joining me today. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you? And I mean, I mentioned in the beginning a few links to find you online. Do you want to go over those again? Are there any other places that people can find you online?
Yeah, teachthegeek.com. You mentioned that one. You also mentioned the YouTube channel, youtube.teachthegeek.com. I release an episode every Wednesday. I really enjoy it. I get to interview a lot of STEM professionals, engineers and scientists mainly, and we talk about the importance of public speaking. And like myself, they saw the benefit of it eventually as well. And I asked them questions like, if you weren't all that great at it at first, what'd you do to get better at it? Do you have a process for putting your presentations together? If so, what is it? If you do get nervous before giving presentations, how do you deal with your nerves? Then even outside of just public speaking, it's really interesting to learn about their career journeys. I had a guest not too long ago, and she got a degree in civil engineering, never worked as a civil engineer, went to law school, worked as an attorney for a few years, left to become a stay-at-home mom for about a decade, and now she works as a personal stylist. Typical career trajectory, if you ask me.
Yeah, very typical, right? All right. Well, Neil, thank you again so much. I really appreciate you spending some time with me on the podcast and sharing all your wisdom insight. Anything else that we should talk about before we sign off?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast, and really, I guess the last parting words I just really want to emphasize is to the engineers that are watching or listening, is the importance of developing those soft skills. These are not something to just put aside and or on the back burner. If you really want to advance in your career and just benefit as a person, really improving those non-technical skills like communicating with others, both orally and written, can really put you on that next level.
Thank you so much, Neil. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Aaron Monker, founder of Pipeline Design and Engineering. If you liked what you heard today, please share the episode. To learn how your team can leverage our team's expertise developing turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines, and with product design, visit us at teampipeline.us. Thanks for listening.